Just before we dive back into the episode, I wanted to quickly share something that might interest you, especially if today's conversation has got you thinking about your own sustainability work. Some of the things we hear most in this industry are, I wish I could connect with other people doing this work, or I'd love to turn my sustainability expertise into something more. Well, 51 to Carbon Zero, the sponsor of this podcast, have created their own referral network. And it does exactly that. This isn't about selling you something, it's actually about helping you make money while building the sustainability community we all need. So here's what's in it for you. First, you get to join a genuine community of sustainability experts who share knowledge, refer work to each other, and solve problems together. So, no more working in isolation. Secondly, there's real money involved. There's 10% plus commission on software referrals. We're talking about projects that go from 30 grand up to 100 grand. Plus, you'll be able to boost your presence by taking part in our fireside chats. I've actually got an email in front of me from Louise Stevens, one of the ambassadors, and it says that all her clients are genuinely happy because she's got a great partner and her clients love them. But here's the bigger picture. You'll be helping accelerate the sustainability transition that we all desperately need. Every referral, every connection, every collaboration moves us closer to the world we're all working towards. If this resonates with you and you want to earn some extra income, click the link in our show notes to become a 51 to Carbon Zero ambassador. Okay, back to the show. Welcome to the Green Element podcast, where we meet business leaders and innovators transforming their operations to be more environmentally and socially sustainable, and in the process help you on your journey of sustainability. I'm your host, Will Richardson. Today, we are speaking to John Grant, a marketing and innovation consultant, as well as an author of several successful books. John's first book, The New Marketing Manifesto, was named one of the top 10 best business books in 1999. And his most recent book, Green Marketing, is shortlisted for the Business Book Awards 2021. John is a communication strategist and has worked with an extensive list of high-profile organisations, including the BBC, Cafe Direct, Ecotricity, Lego, IKEA, as well as the British and Swedish governments. He is also a fellow at the Royal Society of Arts. John, welcome.
Thank you. Long introduction. I hope I can live up to it.
It's
Just old.
It's so exciting to have you on here. And the reason being, we interviewed John from Don't Cry Wolf a few weeks ago and discussed the proliferation of greenwashing in marketing, comms, and the PR industry, and how this is increasing in the run-up to COP26. So there's a lot for us to talk about. So before we get started, though, can I ask you about how you went from writing a very successful book, New Marketing Manifesto, to focusing more on sustainability, and what brought you into this sector?
Yes, very good question. So in the 90s, me and a group of friends had a ad agency and digital agency and all kinds of things agency called St. Luke's, and we were a radical workplace democracy where we had equal shares, and we were publishing back then about what we called companies' role in society. And we had clients including Anita Roddick back when she was running the Body Shop, and she forced us to do a sustainability audit. And I had my sort of nose pressed to the glass of sustainability and how it met with marketing about the same time as we were all getting our head around the digital revolution and other things, and actually new ways of working. We had one of the first sort of beanbags and hot desking offices in the world and so forth. So we were innovative little hot shop, and I wrote the New Marketing Manifesto to express a desire for a more human, more authentic, less cling film wrapped style of marketing, which we'd been pioneering, and to sort of present my calling card as a consultant going to the world. And since then, I've written 8 books, actually. 3 of them have been directly on the topic of sustainability. One other one was post-Arab Spring. I wandered around that region and interviewed people there about how culture was changing. Wrote a book mostly based on lifelong learning and the way that we've becoming sort of self-taught. And I tend to pick up, I am a marketeer and, communications consultant, but I tend to pick up on what I think are the most important trends that my clients, large and small, are trying to digest. And sustainability has been on that agenda for 20 years. Literally how I got into it was Jonathan Porritt grabbed me almost exactly 20 years ago and some other people in marketing. And there were two bookend problems between sustainability and marketing. He was quite early in the Forum for the Future journey then and working with big clients like Unilever. And he hit two problems. One was sort of greenwash, and he was constantly worried that he was just giving big bad corporations license to operate by giving them a nice sort of fig leaf. And at the other end was this complete indifference and incomprehension. He would work with a team at Unilever on sustainable pea farming for Findus, or they started the Marine Stewardship Council. He'd then get to the marketing department and somebody would say, "Now, we researched this last year, people won't pay more for this. It's not relevant to mainstream mums, great, we'll put it on the back of the packet," sort of thing. And he was really struggling to engage marketers and saw actually a lot of the evils of the world being, driven by overconsumption and, some of the negative, the shadow of this sort of very designed and marketed world. So he got a group of us together in around 2001. I was also working then with, for instance, IKEA had just done their first sustainability report and was starting to try and work out how to integrate this. And one of my clients was very senior at IKEA and brought me and a copywriter in to help, with the creative aspects of communicating sustainability. By about 2006, half the clients I met every week were stuck on it. We had the Al Gore movie, loads of eco hype. GE spent 100 million on a campaign called Eco Imagination, and greenwashing was a huge issue back then. And so I sort of wrote the first book that I wrote on sustainability. It was the result of, I was doing a workshop with some consultants for Nike and Nike Women, and Nike had been in the doghouse because there was that picture of the kid in Pakistan stitching one of their footballs, and they'd been attacked by Naomi Klein, and they were known as one of the sort of evil corporations, and they were trying to get back into this space, which they've been very prominent in over the last 15 years. And me and the other consultant who ran a small sort of sustainability agency disagreed on almost every point of what we were bringing to the workshop. And, for instance, her view was they need to keep their head down. We're just going to do a bit of stakeholder influencing and sort of buddy up and sort of earn the right to be in the conversation. I walked in with a big board that said women run the world. And really just thought that, with the power of a brand like that, we should try and do some social good and engage people and excite a new generation and talk about women and development. And you'll know that with actually the empowerment of women and girls is one of the key climate solutions apart from anything else. And I kind of said, well, there must be, that we wanted to take a sort of a 360 view of what's happening at the moment and, what's working, what isn't working, what's greenwash, who's been doing well, and take that to the workshop. And I wrote a paper, and I was chatting to my publisher at the time about a new book. And I said, well, what about this? And I sent the paper over, and she said, oh, yes, please. And so I wrote it as a sort of, the core insight was, it's sort of like digital marketing. It kind of depends. It's different if you're Innocent Drinks or a local vegan cafe or HSBC. There isn't one digital marketing. And if you do the wrong sort, you can look too corporate or too flimsy or so forth. So the center of the first book was a great big grid that said, it depends. It depends if you're trying to improve your reputation, launch innovative products that people aren't familiar with, change behavior. And it actually depends sort of, if you're really out there leading on green, or you're just trying to do a solid job catching up and so forth, and, be honest about that. So it was a kind of trying to burst the bubble of all the eco hype and say, it's strategy. There are some different ways that, and I've worked with everybody, as I say, from Innocent to Cisco to, to NGOs, to governments, and they all have different green marketing needs. And the latest book was really, in many ways, an update. So much had changed. Every company's at the moment tying themselves in knots, for instance, trying to just define a purpose and things like that. There were new topics to cover.
It's so difficult listening to you then, and thinking back to my early days with advertising agencies in the early 2000s, and I behind the scenes working with their facilities, were reducing their footprint massively, converting them to renewables, getting them to stop using taxes, getting them to fly less, absolutely bringing their stationary procurement down, bringing all of their operational energy and etc. down. But none of them wanted to talk about it at all because they're worried about greenwashing. And it's still the same to the day. And it was a real shame because I do think that there was that fine line, wasn't there? There were companies that were willing to shout about it, and I had a very senior, I think he was the CEO of one of the largest ad agencies, and I'm not going to say which one, was talking to another one of my clients, and they had this open forum, and he openly said, I mean, this was back in 2006, 2007, greenwashing is okay because it gets people on the right journey. And I was a bit like, that's the problem.
Well, there is a huge debate around it. So one of the earliest cases of greenwashing that was challenged was Chevron made some commercials, and one of them featured a butterfly sanctuary, another was a bear conservation scheme, and it was sort of a critical journalist calculated that the average scheme featured in a TV commercial was a spend of about $5,000, and they spent $5 million on the, per commercial on the media spend. So there was a disproportion. The butterfly sanctuary turned out to be in a bay where they'd devastated nature with an oil spill some years earlier. And, there were all kinds of egregious things about it. But the thing about that campaign is before it was challenged, it had already won an ad industry effectiveness award. And one of the reasons people greenwash is that if you're allowed to get away with it, making yourself look greener than you are leaves all kinds of positive associations. So, for instance, if you're a food company, and I've done some work this year with PepsiCo, and they've got a lot of stuff about regenerative farming, as do Unilever and so forth. And they've got a whole scheme about, for instance, supporting women farmers. As soon as you put that in the frame that looks like advertising, it makes your crisps look more appetizing and so forth. It has all positive associations, makes you feel less processed and more farm to fork. And, they have been, bless them, also moving the direction of, slightly healthier options and cereal bars and, all sorts of other things. But the reason people greenwash is if it's not challenged, it kind of works because, you like to buy from this lovely, friendly, American oil company that's helping the bees and the butterflies. And there's a huge role to be played in this by the spiky NGO critic who are basically the traffic wardens of egregious marketing. But the reason people do it is if they're let get away with it, it works. And in some cases, it's so ridiculous that it doesn't work. I mean, cases I covered in my recent book include the Palm Oil Council of Malaysia, who made a whole commercial about how the plants on their farms are absorbing carbon and supporting birds and other stuff, and ignoring the fact that they're in a region with the highest deforestation for the last 10 years and that they've been driving it, plantation farming as well as logging. So, and that was, flat out banned. But they made a commercial saying, enjoy our beautiful palm oil made by nature and, et cetera, et cetera. If you go back far enough, oil was made by trees in the Jurassic period. And I was once invited on, I turned it down, but there was a Canadian TV show on the eve of the next day when the EU were about to ban shale oil imports, and right. Canada felt that this was, this was just like turning down, some of their beautiful exports and benefits to their economy. And they had an equivalent of Newsnight, had to debate with some experts on. And I was speaking to the researcher, and she said, well, we think it's a marketing and positioning thing that, people call it tar sands, and you see images of seals being covered with, other things. And actually, it's what we need to do. And it's just part of the oil industry. And I said, so are you saying you need somebody to come up with an idea like beach oil because people have like positive association? She said, that's exactly what we want to talk about in the show. And that, again, that's sort of greenwash, and it's very strategic, yeah. Which is people are trying to defend their industries. And there's a sort of corporates and businesses have an equivalent of the human ego where it's really hard to believe that you're the bad one. I mean, I worked for years in advertising and then, was often meeting critics of advertising and had a less rosy-eyed view of it, but we still sort of believed in what we did, and we were at the nice fringe end of it. But it's most people start with the premise that they're okay, and that their chocolate company is, largely speaking, not bound up in slave labor and all kinds of other things that maybe that they haven't fully uncovered, and that they're a perfectly nice company and they just need to sort of promote themselves a bit better, and whatever they're doing that they report on sustainability is the best in the world, and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that maybe by putting people into the limelight, then the critics will actually focus in on them more. So it could. I'm advocating greenwashing, but do you know what I mean? It's
well, there's a sort of mix, because I think it's been really interesting. Like, I've got a book by an anthropologist written in the 70s or 80s about one of her main case examples is why environmentalists and business people will never understand each other. I think there is a genuine understanding now, and there was a really mature debate in the equivalent of this podcast, the blogosphere, when Walmart committed to sustainability around 2006 and started making some really significant moves to move their supply chain, and for the first time really trying to create the data set and the transparency so that they could track sustainable progress. And this was really difficult for people to take in, but most people said, well, suck it and see, because if something that size is moving in the right direction, we should support it. And there is that license, but you're absolutely right. For instance, when Kit Kat brought out the fair trade Kit Kat in the UK, then Greenpeace went all out for them and made a viral video about somebody biting into a Kit Kat bar, and it was an orangutan's finger. Sort of very, very sort of distasteful, but they attacked them because they'd been fighting them for years on the deforestation policies. To be fair, Nestle would say it was more Cargill's problem than theirs, but obviously they were selling the branded
products. Still, what are the main problems in marketing today when talking about sustainability, and what are organisations doing, and what should they be doing?
Well, my overwhelming hope for any client I work with is to sort of innovate and educate. So to actually genuinely take a lead so that you're pushing things forward, and for the good of the species and the planet, you're actually progressing. And then that should throw up education needs, because if you innovate enough, you have to teach people to adopt electric bikes rather than a petrol car, and so forth. And the summary conclusion of my first book is it's not about making normal things look green, which is greenwash. It's about making green things normal. So, pioneering plant-based diets, different travel patterns, ways of doing work conversations like we're doing now, but actually marketing as in, the great consumer lifestyle adoption years from the 50s to the 70s, when a lot of things were new. Marketing was genuinely teaching people to use and get their heads around new devices and new lifestyles. And that, for instance, that used to be Sony's company vision, was to create the new lifestyles. And we're sort of, I think when marketing's forward like that, and when you're trying to get people to have more plant protein in their diet and so forth, you're on a really sure footing. And then you've just got to bring the market with you. But if you're the pioneer in that new sector, then you will take you'll be the first mover and take market share. So that's kind of my favorite confluence of sustainability and strategy. I'm less of a fan of, we've made all of this investment in our water schemes and other stuff, and now we need to make ourselves look good, because that feels a little bit less progressive. But there's a lot of difference still between the companies that are really trying and some of their competitors, and it is worth trying to bake it in and get a competitive advantage. And then it depends. If you're in food, there's a set of issues. If you're in packaging, there's another set of issues. If you're in transportation, there's another set of issues. All of us need to transition to a sane and livable donut economics zone, and that transition is hitting almost every industry that I meet really hard, as people are realizing that they have to shift a very long way, and also that there are big opportunities in the direction of where we're shifting if they get there first. But it is, my answer is usually it depends. I'm working, for instance, at the moment with, or have been working with, two, again, almost bookends in the food industry, one of whom is making protein with the help of microbes. You can read an article in The Guardian about them. They're called Solar Foods, and they're basically now just starting to bring consumer food products to market which are synthesized for bacteria. So whereas the Impossible Burger gets its unique taste from the cooperation of biotech and yeast making a particular flavor that you get in meat called heme. Now they're going to be making the actual bulk, the protein, that way. And then at the other end of the scale, I've been working with one of the biggest food processing companies in the world, looking at actually their vision and how their world is shifting, that in future they're going to be making less of the ingredients that go into bulk foods and fast foods and processed foods and so forth, and in future making biomaterials like replacements for plastic, and also pretty much a lot of the natural materials in the economy and foods will be synthesized in future using something that looks a bit like fermentation. And that's going to need an enormous input of things like sugars, which, from home brewing beer, you need to put some dextrose in at the start. So they're really totally different companies in terms of their size profile, but they're sort of both looking at the roadmap.
Yeah.
Like there's a think tank report that said by 2030 most of the protein we eat will come from these sources, and the reason is that it will be 10 times cheaper than meat protein.
Yeah.
Or anything we can derive from things like soy. So,
and interestingly, although they're coming from two opposite ends, they're coming to the same conclusions.
They are coming to the same space. I'm trying to get them. Some of them know each other already, but I'm trying to get them in a room, because one of them is sort of bringing the keys to an entirely new kind of like combination of the farm and the factory and a new way of synthesizing food, and the other has 100 years of experience of how to scale stuff and get it to global markets and make it safe. But they have very different marketing questions. One, the question was, how can we make, what should we make? There's a lot of plant-based burgers out there. Should we make tofu? What should we actually be making with these new proteins to sort of start getting people on board and test the concept? And at the other end, they're really trying to work out how to, with anything large in transition, you have to work out these different horizons so that you're not betting it all on a future that isn't here yet, like the internet companies that were designed for broadband when you had 56k modems, but you have to sort of stage it and move this stately large thing.
And I mentioned in your introduction that you've worked for some high-profile organisations and governments. Could you share some insights into their concerns and questions about sustainability in marketing?
I mean, the government one is different. The work I did with the British government was for a campaign called Act on CO2, and we were trying to figure out how, I had colleagues in that project, obviously people in policy. The bit that I looked on was looking particularly at transportation, and we were trying to find that we had colleagues from something called the Nudge Unit who were looking at behavioural economics, but we were trying to figure something out. We're all still trying to figure out, which is how to find accessible ways that are effective in moving people's behaviour. And, for instance, in transportation, we've seen a combination of various things. The sort of, the lockdown has probably done more than anything else, but, there was a growing flight chain movement. There was a very rapid movement towards, veganuary and more plants in diets and mainstream diets, not just hardcore vegans and vegetarians. And so there were some things shifting. We were trying to find the places. I think in these complex cultural ecosystems, what doesn't work very well is that sort of old style marketing of, it's almost like an all over body massage. What you need to find is these acupuncture points where if you press really hard here, everything can start moving in a certain direction. So that was, and I ended up doing about 30 focus groups around the country, talking to people about climate change, the Stern Report, their grandchildren, their habits. One of the things we found, one of the things that people miss is it's kind of like dieting. What you need is a moderate long-term concern, and for instance, if you and I are to meet our part of the Paris obligations, we have to make just under 4% reduction per year, and in compound terms. So it's not like you have to try and chop 40% out of your footprint this year. Great if you can. If you've got, when I was first writing a book on sustainability, I realized that trying to cross-sell most of the international conferences that I spoke to with the idea that I would appear on video would do more to affect my footprint than almost anything else. And, you by all means make more radical change. I mean, the difficulty like dieting is once you've done the low-hanging fruit and the easy things, then you come on to, every year it gets slightly harder to find another 4% to throw out of the balloon. So for instance, one of our strategies in a very common sense way that came out of that was asking people to drive 5 less miles a week. And the reaction in the focus groups was, well, thank God for that. I thought you were going to tell me to give up my car, and I, have to get the kids to school and I have to get to the call center where I work. And it's just like, it's all right for you guys who live in a big city, but, where I am, I can't hitchhike to work. Yeah. But if you say 5 less miles a week, you go, well, was that time where we drive the kids to the park to get some exercise and maybe we could cycle there? People can so if you can find a space like that, which is achievable, and I'm sure this is true of, I met actually a world expert on why people are getting diabetes. He studied blood chemistry and early onset diabetes at Oxford University. And I said, so what can people do? He said, just cut a biscuit a day. He said about, it's that drip of calories over 20 years onto your midriff, which will cause that and cardiovascular disease and other stuff. And no crash diet is going to get you to where you need to be. Obviously, exercise and other stuff. But he said, for most people are having so few extra calories than they need. If they cut a biscuit a day, they could about do it. And it's sort of quite a hard space for marketing to work in because you want something really heroic, like run a marathon. But you just know that almost no people are going to make it.
Yeah, it's that trying to promote the boring.
Yeah. Well, there is, if you look at marketing, it was a familiar syndrome because I worked with some of the pioneers of the digital world, like Napster, when they were in the Supreme Court. And there was this fundamental opposition between capitalism, which is based on enclosing and owning some assets, traditionally some land, but later some IP. So most successful high growth businesses are surrounded by a thicket of lawyers protecting their IP. But digital came out and just said, well, like Napster, we just want people to share stuff. And, if you can copy it, you can share it. And we want this to be like Wikipedia. That's the sort of implicit design of digital things, and actually finding a mid-space where capitalism could coexist with a system that's fundamentally was built by, hippies in California in the 60s and 70s and wanted everything. That generation all hated Microsoft because, as one of them said, it's like selling people the washing instructions separate from the clothes. We've always just, it was always a bit like Linux, where people just shared operating systems that worked at the back end and sort of helped each other, but it was never like a commercial thing. It was more voluntary. So it was like an enclosure of the commons. So there were things to work out between digital, and that there are still, big conflicts, and there are huge debates over, the effect of Facebook and so forth, and whether you're a product or an audience, and your rights within that. There's a similar fundamental split between something sustainability, which the simple thing people say is, well, sustainability and environmentalists want people to buy less and marketers want people to buy more. But actually within that there is sort of working with companies on their sustainability, there's like a huge long checklist. I went to meetings with IKEA about there was a volume of reporting that was about how do we know that we've got a fire extinguisher in every factory and some other safety things in places. And they said at HSBC, if they ever printed off their sustainability reporting, it would fill 2 rooms. So there was a big, please don't print on that. Marketing's just trying to find that one brilliant thing. It's a sort of like a cheeky personality or tone of voice, but Italian sports cars are sexy. Don't worry so much about the reliability. German cars are reliable and dependable and solid, and when the door clunks, it's like a safe. And marketing is not only the science of hyperbole and exaggeration, but they understood, from the 60s, that was this thing called the unique selling proposition. Actually, one of the things that I've been doing a lot with clients recently is running their sustainability through that I call it the unique sustainability proposition, and saying, look, there's probably 20 things that you're doing that are nice to do with farming, packaging, water, the way you treat employees and other stuff. But what's the one thing that you really want to drive and be known for? Like for Anita Roddick, that was against animal testing.
Yeah.
And she did like a ton of other things, but you knew there was some driving impetus at the heart of it. But generally speaking, sustainability comes with a huge long, you get sheets and sheets of pages, and you just need to find a really singular program, point of focus at the heart of this if you're going to communicate it well. Because it's like if I tell you 20 things about me, you won't remember any of them. And if I just say, there's this one thing, like my hobby is photography or something like that, then you have like a very particular image of who I am.
Yeah, that's actually a really good way to put it, actually. And we could certainly learn off that at Green Element with working for clients. And rather than saying to them, oh, you're doing this, 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 and this, we should be marketing that, actually focusing in on. And I think our listeners listening to it is not think about everything that you're doing. Just look at that one thing that you're doing really well that sets you aside from other people within your industry.
It's a matter of sifting, because it's not, don't stop doing all of those things. Like PepsiCo, they were going through and reviewing their brands, and they called it Swords and Shields, which I assume they got from a consultant like me. But there's a bunch of stuff where we need to be at a good standard, and that's a shield. So, a shield means that we won't be criticised for, for instance, in their industry, Coca-Cola's been criticised over things like labour rights and trade union murders, the sharp end of labour rights, and depleting water aquifers in areas of water stress in India and so forth. So you need to, in order to be a credible player and pushing your sustainability and actually marketing sustainability, you need to be pretty good on everything, but you need to be outstanding on something, and something that really resonates with people. And, I went through a project earlier this year with a telco, and I was like, look, it's like off the charts impressive that you're going to be carbon net zero by 2025. I can't believe how you can do that. Even people like Unilever are looking 10 years later, and it's brilliant. And you've had to shift a lot of infrastructure, for instance, towards renewable energy to achieve that. Brilliant. Hats off to you. However, yes, as your surveys are saying, this isn't resonating much with customers, and you're not getting more people coming to you than Vodafone just because of this commitment. And we need to find a space in between that people really love. So one of the things we're exploring was people's love of green spaces. And I had a big phrase in the presentation saying people nod to climate, but they love nature. So if you can bring this down to, everywhere in, and the other thing was, just from a marketing point of view, they were spending all of their money actually the previous year on, big crowd participation events, whether they were sport or music, or they own a famous music and event arena. And so they had a marketing budget sitting there that they couldn't spend. And like, where is the zeitgeist? Where are people going this year? It's to the local park. And if you can start doing apps with Gruffalo walks and tree climbing with your kids, if you can start doing stuff to actually support all the councils that are crying out for more resources because their actual infrastructure is creaking because so many people are using it and they need investment. And it's sort of, but you need to find the phrase or the word I've been using is cusp. And two things. One is we're on the cusp of change, and you need to find a tipping point. You can't be credible just going, actually, you don't want your strategy to be we're aiming for the 4%. You want to be outstanding. And the times call for that. But the C, the USP is your unique sustainability proposition. The C is compelling. Like Coca-Cola's most, according to one report I read, their most successful consumer promotion in history was the one where they put the polar bears on the can and gave the money to WWF and Arctic Conservation.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know if we have that here. They had that in the States. And it was just mums and kids in America love polar bears. And every kid was coming home from school saying, Mum, what are we doing to help the polar bears? And it was just whatever else you think of the Coca-Cola Corporation, they more and less invented consumer marketing, and they really know how to move hearts and minds. And, lo and behold, white can, and, genuinely money going to something that people would support. But it's finding, what marketing people are really good at is what Solly from Futera calls finding the sizzle.
Interesting. And so I asked John from Don't Cry Wolf a a similar question when I interviewed him. What marketing trends have you noticed in the run-up to COP26 in relation to sustainability?
I mean, I think actually that started a few years prior with the climate strikes. The food company that I'm working with, I first met the CEO 2 years ago, and I had a really big question, which is, why is he meeting this guy with a beard and cardigan where he works for a stock market listed company? And he said, I've got two Gretas living at home, and my daughters ask me every day what we're doing on this, and we're doing a lot, but I feel that we should be doing more, and I want that to be part of what we're driving here. And we're a great company, and if we go after this agenda, we can be great at this too. So I think a world in which there were climate strikes by our children in 2,000 cities across the world. And, 2019 is hard to remember after the time we've been through since, but it was the year of street protests, from Latin American Spring, Catalan independence, Hong Kong, etc. It was all kicking off. And I think that and the employee side of that, like companies like Amazon came to the table because an employee climate action group brought them to the table and said it's just disgusting that we're such a leading company and all these other tech companies like Microsoft are doing so much and we don't seem to be doing much. And Bezos was more or less shamed, it seemed, internally into doing this. And the same at Google, people were really pushing for progress more on social sustainability and #MeToo and equality and so forth. So I think those pressures were already there, and most significant companies I know, like the large companies, were starting this year. Like one of my clients said their CEO gave an all-staff address over video, and he said, I want you to focus, and they're a global travel company, I want you to focus on our two key priorities for the year. And I would have expected that to be, rebuilding after lockdown. We're a travel company. And he said it's sustainability and diversity. If we get those right, every time you're sitting down to write a piece of code, think, how are we moving forward and taking a lead on sustainability and diversity? So I think, and you'll know that thousands now of companies have committed to science-based targets. And, some have taken, for instance, the Amazon 10 years early pledge, which was one of the things that came out positively when they did come to this agenda. And I think there is a long queue of companies that committed to this that will want to use the platform, just like anybody in sport would want to use the platform of an Olympics. A lot of people want to use the platform of the public interest at that time to socialize what they're doing, bring their stakeholders to it and so forth. But I've seen that. I mean, really, I think climate concerns in the boardroom between about 2009 and 2017 looked a bit more shaky, and but there's been a fundamental re-engagement and a new level of interest, and also driven by the great triad of investors. Everybody from BlackRock to the the millennials with their sort of inherited wealth, wanting sustainability to be at the heart of what they invest in. Employees and consumers increasingly going, do you know what? I don't want that yogurt in the plastic pot. You're going to have to sort something out because I just don't want to see all this trash. And the Attenborough documentary.
And finally, one last question about, I noticed on LinkedIn that you amongst others, put up the picture of the G7 people watching the air show, and the comments that Greta Thunberg talked about of, really? They've got an air show and a climate, I mean, it is absolutely ridiculous. And we've talked a lot about business and what businesses are doing in order to reduce climate change or mitigate climate change. And you have worked in government. What are your thoughts around that? Is it business that's leading the way?
Yes, definitely business is leading the way. I think there are really progressive voices and examples emerging in business, and they've got a freedom of movement, which they haven't had. I think things like the renewed American commitment to something like the Green New Deal, a massive green economy infrastructure investment in Europe and America, will make a huge difference. So government has to drive that, and can also, the government of California has sort of driven everything from emission standards in cars to recycle content in paper by setting regulations. And companies go, well, California is such a big company, we might as well such a big region, we might as well take their standards and then market everything to the world based on those standards. So it's not that governments don't have a strong role to play. Listen, you've got amazing political leaders in this generation, like Ahern in New Zealand. There are really strong, positive leaders, and let's see where Biden gets to with the political situation in America, and they've clearly got a role to play. But I think, in a way, it's simply an innovation challenge, and it's an odd kind of innovation challenge because we could more or less get there with existing technology. If we stopped R&D, we've got enough solutions, nature-based solutions and other solutions, to sort of get there with what we have. But it's still a challenge which requires a galvanizing of effort behind an initiative. I really loved the speech which, what was his name? Sam, the CEO of Walmart, gave in 2006 when they were setting out on this agenda. And he talked about his experience and his company's experience of Hurricane Katrina. And he said, I saw how we could be, as a company, serving our community, sheltering people, getting emergency supplies, keeping people safe. And it was such a wonderful role to take in those communities where we live. And I want us to be that kind of company every day and every week and every year. And he said, look, climate change is his phrase, just a slow Katrina. If we, as Greta says, realize that our house is on fire, then you can respond. And what business can do, both large business and entrepreneurial business, is bring that sort of galvanized, energetic impact player force to shifting things fast. Because most of the models, better than me, say that we can make it, but it's almost technically we can make it, but we'd have to make an extraordinary shift compared to business as usual.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being on today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, welcome. So, BBC Radio John, as my missus calls it.
And thanks for listening to the Sustainable Business Podcast. If you've enjoyed today's content, why not join our post-podcast discussion in our online community at sustainabilitysolved.org. We'll be sharing ideas and collaborating on sustainable marketing with our members. Join now and find a space to collaborate with like-minded professionals, learn more about sustainable business and inspire others to become more environmental. We also have an important update for our listeners. We will soon be changing the name of this podcast to Sustainability Solved to better reflect the content of our podcast. You will still be able to access all our original podcasts on your preferred platform. And if you enjoy this podcast, please make sure you subscribe so you get every episode, and don't forget to follow Green Element on LinkedIn, Twitter and Instagram. So you really enjoy sustainability and want to be a part of the solution? Come and join our vibrant community now. Book a call and we can talk more.